AI in the supply chain, moving from hype to high impact decisions. I'm joined today by Bill Benton. He is co-founder of Gain Systems. Hello, Bill.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
Thank you for being with me. I appreciate it. So, Bill,
Sure.
How can organizations cut through all the noise around AI and concentrate on the right use cases?
Well, I think it all starts with defining where we tend to advocate something like an impact matrix. So if you imagine what's the speed to deploy, right? And that includes considering data availability, skills, cultural adoption, right? And then how are you likely to impact the enterprise, right? Is it a small, medium, or large problem? Mm-hmm. So it starts there, right? And each organization can be quite distinct. So once you've sort of discovered it's those things that are high impact and highly deployable, and it's usually a small set, right, of maybe a dozen potential candidates. There might be 1 to 3 that fit that. Mm-hmm. And then focus on getting a win there. And it's usually unglamorous, right? So what you're hearing about at shows like this, which is fully autonomous planning or, near perfect demand prediction with machine learning models that read, if you will, social media and tariff databases and whatnot, right? Those are later stage generally. And a lot of those are still science projects as opposed to enterprise scale deployable solutions.
So what kind of stuff is a quick win?
So some of the things we've seen, simple, like how do I predict my lead time to procure, produce, or transfer something better, right? Which is very simple when you think about all the data that goes into a purchase, production, or distribution plan. There's hundreds of data points that a planner is considering. That one improving that by reducing the error by 30 to 40%, might improve your outcome by 15%. Wow. And it's literally just one area. And when you talk about like, how does this complement, say, what humans are doing?
Complement, not replace.
Right. This would be a case of that because usually they just don't have time to pay attention to this right now, or they don't have a method for addressing it. So as this would be a classic case where it's usually quite deployable, it's high impact, and it's complementing what they do. So it's not a threat, right? The other thing you want to do is you don't want to say, here, I want you to buy into this innovation that's likely to replace your or your neighbor's job, right?
You got to make that clear right up front, though. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking about laying the path to this AI implementation in a way that the implication being that a lot of companies kind of skip that step and just, they're dazzled by the technology and don't lay the proper groundwork.
Right. It's often like a technology chasing a use case,
yeah,
rather than inverting that and understanding where are the high impact and deployable use cases and how do we focus there.
So what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have when they're trying to apply AI in this space?
One, I think, would be the difference between science projects and deployable solutions.
Right.
So
I'm talking about short and to long term again when you say.
Well, or like
more than that.
No, that's certainly part of it. The other, it's not an or, it's an and right. The probability of success. So 83% of these types of deployments either fail outright or achieve less than half of the goals that they set out to achieve. Wow. So I think that's the major issue, right? So what's the misconception? Misconception is not discerning what the probability of success is in a let's say an authentic way, right? But going for the maximum hype. And then secondly, making sure that you can get some quick wins, move forward incrementally, right? And try to do that so that the last success funds the next success, right? And you build some momentum that way.
Okay, so you're helping me to understand how we can deliver the most value, most meaningful value in supply chain today with the help of AI. But I mean, tell me more about what is really meaningful, what is really constructive at a time when we're facing such uncertainty, number one, and the need to accelerate decision-making, number two. Where does AI play that role?
Sure. I think some of the areas where it can have immediate and profound impact are around creating distinct scenarios. So right now, scenario planning is largely the human saying, here's my plan if demand is below expectation, at expectation, or above expectation.
So-called what-if type of scenario planning.
That's right, but it's a finite number of explicitly denoted scenarios. And in reality, there's probably thousands of probable conditions, context, scenarios. And amongst those, there might be dozens that you could group into different types of events, right? So stagflation, right, is a type of event. That's where we have increasing interest rates and decreasing economic growth. That's going to have a particular dynamic on particular products. So the ability to use AI to not just do scenario planning, but to actually generate probable scenarios. So that's where the generative AI comes in. It's good at something like that. But then also have tools that can do what's called discrete event simulation. So you can go back and say, how would this scenario have performed? What would have resulted from using this scenario over the past X period, right?
You're playing back what's already happened, but you're offering what-if scenarios from the past instead of the future.
That's right. So the simulation isn't just saying, if I do this, here's what my future looks like. It's actually saying, what would my likely transportation costs be, handling in the warehouse, working capital inventory, the service level provided to the customer, capacity utilization. And to be able to do that thousands of times without having to direct the simulation tool into what simulations and scenarios to run, I think is one area. Like when you think about doing some of the things we do, but at a 10x, 100x, 1000x scale, that would be an answer of where I think AI can make a difference in the foreseeable term.
But an AI or machine learning engine needs to be trained in your particular company and your one's particular supply chain. How do you go about doing that? How do you go about giving it the proper input that it can make these intelligent decisions?
Well, one of the things that we try to do is we extrapolate what's called lateral learning, right? So how can we take what we've observed and apply that sort of like for like, right? So we've never bought from this particular supplier in Thailand for this product line, but we bought a somewhat similar product line in Thailand or Vietnam or some other Southeast Asian country so that we can at least get a range of probable outputs or parameters, right? Which is not precise, but it's accurate, if you know the distinction. By accurate, meaning we can accurately predict a range of likely outputs or outcomes, right? So I think our lead time is going to be between 9 and 15 weeks versus 10 and 12.
Or it feels like we've been bombarded by events and supply chains that hadn't happened before. And the question is, if we'd had this powerful AI engine before, 5 years ago, would it have been able to predict all the things that actually happened to the point, at least close enough to the point where we could take some action to mitigate it?
Right.
I don't know.
No, I mean, that's a great question. Look, we can't predict the next tsunami or, transport ship wedged in the Suez Canal, whatever major disruption there is. But what we can do is say, what's our time to recover under this potential supply demand scenario? And how does that change if we say purchase from 3 suppliers rather than 1 or 2? And then what kind of insurance in quotes might we want to acquire to make sure that we can survive that time to recover? And is the CFO willing to invest that working capital?
Right.
Or would we rather just pay a little bit more by having a local supplier, right, and an international supplier and you have to feed the eagles, right? It's very hard. Everybody loves one supplier because it makes planning a heck of a lot more simple, right? As opposed to 3 suppliers for the same product. How do you feed them in an optimal way that works for them and keeps them interested in your business when one of those suppliers is unable to deliver? And now you're asking somebody else to deliver twice as much.
Those are naughty questions, but that is supply chain management today. So interesting.
And it's a lot harder to do after the fact than if you have some scenario playbooks already predefined. And that's where AI can really help.
Bill, thank you so much for giving us this little lesson on how AI can really make a difference in supply chains. May I ask you for a moment about Gain Systems?
Sure.
Tell me about who you folks are.
So we started as a planning solution that we felt had very strong optimization automation. We realized that wasn't enough given the dynamics with which supply chains are changing. So we've embraced this combined continuous network modeling and design with planning and layering into that this resilience through massive scenario simulation. And that's where the pragmatic AI comes in, right? As opposed to, one of our credos is we want to avoid the siren song of sapience. This idea that these sapient agents can solve everything. We don't buy into that. We think there's a human component, and that it has to cross all three of these different domains of expertise.
Thanks for the alliteration there. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill, for being with me today. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks.
I have been speaking with Bill Benton of Gain Systems. Thank you very much for watching.
Join SupplyChainBrain and Gain Systems for an eye-opening webinar that will separate the myths from the meaningful. We'll break down the critical differences between true AI, automation, and rule-based systems, and show you how to leverage agentic AI to drive real business value.